organizer for the Next Generation Plenary, along with my colleague, Matteo. We warmly welcome you to our plenary this year, where the topic is Next Gen Impact on Social Responsibility in Space. This plenary showcases the next generation of students and young professionals selected through a competitive process to showcase their work on an international stage at the IAC. It provides a platform and stepping stone in their careers in the space sector.
The Next Gen Plenary is a joint venture between the Workforce Development and Young Professionals Program Committee, the Space Education and Outreach Committee, and the Subcommittee on Global Earth Observation Systems, and the Space Generation Advisory Council. We would like to especially thank the steering committee members of the Next Gen Plenary for their hard work and support of the panel, and especially Carol Carmen and Scott Landry that supported the work of the panelists and the preparation of the panelists throughout the last summer. With that, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, Tanya Masson-Zwan, who is Assistant Professor at Leiden University, as well as President Emerita of the International Institute of Space Law, one of the co-hosts of the International Astronautical Congress. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just a lawyer.
You know
okay, I'll start again. So thank you, Mariam and Matteo, for welcoming us here. Let me do that too. As they said, my name is Tanya Masson-Zwan. My pronouns are she and her, and it's a great honor to be here this morning. And I think some people may still be sleeping it off, but thank you so much for those who are here to support this wonderful group of young human beings who are willing to share their views with us on the important topic of social responsibility for space. What does that mean? Space, of course, has many unique opportunities as well as challenges, and I think that it is important that we address those challenges and those opportunities in an equitable and a sustainable manner. And that means that all actors have to show that social responsibility to maximize the benefits and to minimize the challenges, to address them. So that, of course, has a lot of different aspects, and these young people have been working with Scott and Carol, who have been mentioned already over the past months, to prepare a little speech to highlight what it means for them to be socially responsible in outer space. So you will have the Slido app for you. You will see the QR code on the screen there, so don't hesitate to put your questions up there. We will be taking questions and answers after their pitches, and so please use the Slido app to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our first panelist, who is Andrew Schruckheimer, who is a research assistant at the Space Sustainability Initiative at the University of Colorado Boulder, and he is also a student in aerospace engineering. Andrew, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Schruckheimer. My pronouns are he and him. And like Tanya said, I'm a student studying aerospace engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder in the United States. Today, I'm here to talk to you about space sustainability. Now, when I say the word space sustainability, some of you might be thinking alternative energy methods or perhaps reducing your carbon footprint. But just like we're facing a climate crisis here on Earth, we are also facing growing concerns about buildup of orbital debris and increased congestion in near-Earth space. This resource, which we once viewed as nearly limitless, has now become so polluted that it threatens the very foundation of the space industry that we all know and love. I believe that it's time that we draw a line in the sand and say that enough is enough, and work together to fix this problem. It's no secret that we're in a new age of commercial space. I don't think anywhere that's more obvious than where we are right now at IAC. And for that reason, it's even more important for commercial industry stakeholders to come together to work to ensure that our actions no longer contribute to this dangerous buildup of orbital debris, and to work with one another to ensure that space remains a more safe and sustainable place for all. The million-dollar question is, how do we do this? So, as a research assistant at the Space and Sustainability Initiative, I've had the pleasure of spending the last year or more working with a variety of these different commercial stakeholders in order to understand how a decades-long approach of status quo has gotten us to where we are now. We've engaged with orbital debris experts to understand how increasing collaboration on things like data sharing and communication can help us resolve some of these problems. We've examined how the international community defines and views the term space sustainability, understanding the metrics that go into that term. And we've engaged with commercial operators, satellite owners and operators, to understand their own concerns about operating in this space and to figure out what they want to do to solve this problem. As a student, every day I am exposed and I see the passion and the excitement and the creativity displayed by those around me. Those very individuals that form the basis for the next generation of space pioneers are themselves being inspired by much of the work that you are all out there doing right now. And for me, to see their dreams ripped away from them would be a tragedy. How many of you are out there waiting for your chance to reach for the stars? I can't imagine a world where that is no longer possible due to a lack of foresight and a lack of action from those who have the ability to alter our course. For the sake of current and future generations, I know my fellow panelists and I want to be a part of the movement that will ensure that space remains the province of all humankind for centuries to come. And my question to you today is, will you join us? Thank you.
Who would not join Andrew after that passionate plea? Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're moving on to our next panelist, and that's Juliana Rotola. She's from Italy, and she is an implementation support officer of GEXLA. I hate the acronym, but it means the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities. And she also is a former intern at ESO, the European Southern Observatory. So Juliana, please share your thoughts with us.
Okay, it's working. Good morning, everyone. I am Juliana Rotola. I'm the Implementation Support Officer for GEXLA and the co-lead for the Space Generation Advisory Council Space Law and Policy Project Group. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm from Italy. Social responsibility is critical for environmental sustainability on Earth and in space, and to really guarantee an authentic intergenerational equity. And today I want to touch on this matter from two different perspectives. The first one is satellite constellations and the impact they have on astronomical observations, on the environment, and all the cultural aspects related to the observations of dark skies. The second aspect is instead related to the processes of space democratization and how this can become truly democratic, inclusive, and diverse. Until a few months ago, I was an intern at the European Southern Observatory, an international intergovernmental organization in astronomy. I have been chairing, and I still chair, the Satellite Constellation Working Group for the Dark and Quiet Skies Conference organized by the International Astronomical Union and the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And I led the team that was examining the relevant international regulatory framework for the coordination of satellite activities and astronomical observations. On the one hand, these constellations can really improve the quality of life, especially in isolated communities, and potentially reduce the cost of access to space. On the other hand, these operations constitute real commercial challenges, increase the level of congestions of Earth orbits, especially the low Earth orbits, and raise critical issues for the sustainability of the terrestrial and the outer space environment. This issue has revealed how essential is the industry social responsibility in collaborating with all the affected stakeholders to find a coordination and a balance between all the different interests. And this topic also brings me to the second perspective I want to discuss here today. Because satellite constellations and the various other operations in space, especially commercial one, have set the advancement of a phase of space democratization. But are this process is truly democratic? So in the podcast New Moon that I host with Ringo here, we try to answer this question. We chat with people in the space industry to understand what is the concept of space democratization for them, what inclusivity and diversity and equity should really mean, and how an equal access to space can support vulnerable people and marginalized communities. We want to reimagine our future in space, especially on the moon, to make sure that in the years to come we will explore it and we will use it with a renewed vision that will make this new giant leap a substantial, coordinated new step for humanity as a whole. I think the role of younger generations is really essential in these efforts, so I'm really glad that we have you here today to discuss what are our efforts in shaping the world we would like to live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juliana. And clearly, the democratization of space is a challenge, and I'm glad to see that you are ready to take that up. Next on our panel is Uvimba Sumanga, and she is from Zimbabwe, and she is a space law and policy analyst, and also has her own company, Agrispace. I'm sorry. And she does many, many more things, which she will surely highlight in a minute. So please, Uvimba, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone. My name is Ruvimbo Samanga. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm a graduate of law in trade and investment with a very keen interest in space law. I'm a Zimbabwean with a heart for Africa and a desire to be a global citizen. I've been recognized as an African space leader, an emerging space leader, a top 10 under 30 in the African space industry, and a top talent under 25 in the world. My space law journey began here at the IAC in 2018 when I coached the first team from Africa to win the Manfred Lachs International Space Law Moot Court competition. And I've also had a winning paper at the European Center for Space Law on the data management gaps in remote sensing principles. As a young African woman in space, I've come to learn that social responsibility means capacity building. And as a jack of all trades, I've had the opportunity to build capacity in policy, education, outreach, and entrepreneurship. And these have been my experiences and lessons so far. I've worked in policy with Space in Africa, the Open Lunar Foundation, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Social responsibility through policy means harmonizing legal and technical standards towards the peaceful and sustainable uses of outer space. I've worked in education with AstroZimba, the space education curriculum for kids in Zimbabwe. Social responsibility through education means promoting access to knowledge resources that will equip the future generation. I've also worked in outreach with the Space Generation Advisory Council, and I've come to learn that social responsibility through outreach means raising awareness and inspiring the next generation to get involved in matters of space development. Most recently, I've partnered with Emmy Award-winning director Kelly Kowalski to prepare a documentary on women in space, and thus bring to light how the industry would not be where it is today without the generous contribution of women from all sectors. I hope that the work that I and Juliana will do will likewise impact lunar exploration through our blog and podcast, New Moon. Last but not least, I've worked in entrepreneurship, and I've deliberately left this for last, as it has by far not been the easiest of journeys. But nevertheless, social responsibility through entrepreneurship means facilitating the benefits of outer space to the communities and responding to user needs. It is no secret that Africa's climate challenges are a ticking time bomb. 8 million Zimbabweans are currently food insecure, and by 2050, Africa's food needs will far exceed its supply. To that end, my startup, Aerospace, hopes to service African farmers and African states and empower them with satellite data. Our progress has so far been mapped on a CNN Africa docuseries which aired in March of this year. And the startup actually began as a small community micro-project under the helm of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. I'm also proud to announce that we are a finalist in the Africa Earth Observation Challenge. What these different yet empowering journeys have shown is that, first of all, at the core, social responsibility means exemplary leadership, multidisciplinary skills, and a commitment to social impact. My journey has shown myself that there is enough room for Zimbabwe and Africa in space, and most importantly, there is enough space for young people, for women, for young Black women to aspire to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruvimbo, for that very eloquent story about your impressive journey in outreach, education, entrepreneurship. Very nice. Last but certainly not least is Molly McEachin, and she is a research associate at the Space Sustainability Initiative at the University of Boulder, Colorado Boulder, I should say, and has a master in business and sociology. And Molly, please share with us your thoughts on social responsibility in space.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Molly McEachin. My pronouns are she and her, and I recently graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder with a dual degree in business and sociology. During my time, my education and my research was focused on the impact of the commercial industry on the world. And after being introduced to the aerospace industry, I began to focus more closely on the commercial space industry through my work at the Space and Sustainability Initiative at CU Boulder. As it turns out, the commercial space industry is at a pivotal moment where the norms of behavior are yet to be solidified, and there's still an opportunity for creating a culture of safe and sustainable space commerce. Our work at SSI is actively working towards this culture by bringing together experts, using examples from existing industries, and developing the basis for norms of behavior that will create a more responsible and sustainable future of space. As research associate for the initiative, I have the pleasure of running our advisory board and advisory working groups. These experts are coming together to guide our commercial space market analysis and to develop the basis for these norms of behavior and to prevent negative trends from becoming norms. For instance, when two satellites are set to collide, there are varying beliefs of whose responsibility it should be to navigate this collision. It cannot be left to fate, and instead, we must take into consideration characteristics such as age, owner, mission, maneuverability of the satellite. To understand how current space actors are navigating these issues, we've also put together an informal advisory working group which discusses these issues from the commercial space perspective. In addition to the dialogue at the industry level, though, we must also foster the discussion around responsible and sustainable space activities at the university level. At SSI, we focus on student development and are breaking down traditional disciplinary boundaries in order to train the next generation of space leaders, whether they come from business or from aerospace. Ultimately, Andrew and I are proof that students are at the heart of this initiative. By demonstrating that responsible space activities can be both feasible and profitable, our work aims to train the next generation of space leaders to create a more sustainable future of space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you, all of you, for explaining your views on social responsibility in space. And we've heard many different aspects of that, as I said in the beginning, and really impressed by your stories and your messages and your experiences. So we are going to move now to the interactive part of this plenary session, and we're going to take questions and answers. I've seen some pop up already on the Slido app, but please do not hesitate to add more and also to vote up your favorite questions so that we can take them. Before going there, I want to start with one question here on the panel, and that is perhaps starting with Andrew. If we want to have these standards and best practices to implement sustainability and social responsibility, should that be a government-led initiative, or should we look at the private sector to do so?
You know what, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of the work being done is exploring the feasibility of those two different approaches. Speaking for myself, I think it has to be a collaborative approach. We can't rely on solely governments or solely the private sector if we want to properly address and resolve this problem. I think over the past couple decades, we've seen the results of sort of a government-only led approach, which has resulted in some really good things. We've utilized sort of the existing legal frameworks, the 5 outer space treaties, in order to develop things like guidelines on mitigating space debris and working together to ensure that we don't continue to pollute our orbital environment. The downside is that the existing legal frameworks don't necessarily talk about space debris directly. And so a lot of the existing literature out there isn't legally binding. In other words, there's no obligation for commercial or for government actors to follow them, unless specifically specified. On the other hand, right, the commercial industry approach is, I think, one that is very, very valuable, because they're the ones, increasingly so over the last few years, that are actually in space, that are actually working on new technologies and operating in this environment. And so very often, one thing that I've noticed through my work engaging with them is that they have some of the most, they have, to some degree, the most experience working in these types of environments. And they understand what their needs are and can sort of extrapolate that to what others' needs are. So all in all, I think it really needs to be a collaborative approach between both the public and the private sector.
And I'm really impressed how you, as an aerospace engineer, are also citing legal topics. That's really something also that the interdisciplinarity, the need for understanding all these different facets of space is clear, and that's not always easy, so kudos to you. But perhaps, Juliana, you also, as a space lawyer, do you want to share your thoughts on this? How can we make that happen, that it does become a collaborative effort between industry and government?
So I agree with Andrew that it cannot be one or the other. We must have a work on all the different levels. And I've seen it during the Dark and Quiet Skies conference and all our efforts in the different working groups. So we had a working group working on international law, a working group working on national law, and another one working with the industry for the creation of standards together with astronomers. So we need all these different levels, because the industry can come up with standards together with the, in the case of satellite constellation and astronomy, with astronomers to understand what are the necessary guidelines for new and future operators. But also, these standards can create the fragmentations of best practices. So it's important to have an harmonized level at an international level, some guidelines that can really create more harmonized international frameworks that can provide guidance for the development of future space operations. So yes, it needs to be a collaborative effort, but we also need some more high-level guidance at the international law level to make sure that we know and future operators know what they will see in the future.
Very true. And perhaps, Molly, from your perspective as a business graduate, how could we incentivize the industry to actually go ahead and do that?
That's a great question. So there aren't very many natural incentives beyond the creation of a better environment to be actually operating in, creating some sort of more sustainable culture of space is really critical, but like you said, how do we incentivize it? Something that is really crucial is actually the role of investors and those who are funding these missions and everything. So creating this more general awareness is really key, and creating that pressure both from the space industry, the general public, everything really will guide the companies, but the money is where it's at. And if investors are able to really guide this, I think that will create a lot of movement in the industry.
Yeah, also a very important perspective. And perhaps then lastly, before we go to the many questions I see already popping up on my screen, Ruvimbo, how can we make sure that it is also a fair distribution of effort among the, let's say, old space actors and newly emerging countries? How is it, how can we ensure fairness in that effort?
I think we certainly have a lot of rhetoric in the space community with regards to international cooperation and space being the province of all humankind. But what does that mean in practicality? And I think for developing and emerging space nations, it means having a seat at the table, having a voice to contribute on important space matters, and having the opportunity to rewrite the narrative. I think Africa in particular is in a very prime position to rewrite the space narrative. We are an emerging space market of over 1 billion people. We've recently signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will create an over $3 trillion market of African space products in trade and investment. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to act proactively in space, to sort of act in a way that has never been seen before. We are operating at a time where there are so many amazing developments in outer space, and we get to experience these from the onset, from a proactive point of view. And that makes us prime, I think, real estate for us to sort of set a precedent on how it is to act socially responsibly, and also provide, I suppose, a good framework for how it is to act in international cooperation, act with social harmony, act with intention in outer space. I think that if we have the opportunity to speak at these important forums, it is a chance for us to really engage and show what Ubuntu means. Ubuntu means humanity. It's the core of African realism. It is the core of how we engage with one another, and I think it should be, the footstool of how we engage in outer space.
Beautiful, thank you, Ruvimbo. So I'm going to look at the questions, and I am looking at those that have received many votes, and one of them I'm happy to see because that was something that we did consciously, as you may have heard. We have all been using our pronouns this morning. The question is, what is your view on how sustainability and inclusion are related? So as I said, this was a conscious action that we did, and it was actually suggested by Molly, so I'm going to turn to you to explain how you would answer this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to answer this one. So we really have come into this conference, and at least personally and a couple of my colleagues have noticed that there is a lack of pronouns being included within the IAC and the SGC as well. So we really felt like this was an opportunity to bring forward this topic. In terms of the sustainability and where inclusion fits into that, I know that we've all probably heard the term ESG. Well, the S is for social, and that's something really critical that often gets forgotten when we're talking about sustainability. In Andrew's talk, he talked about how the word may come up and make you think of climate change or renewable energy. Well, we really can't forget the social aspect of that. Inclusion of pronouns is something that really will make everyone feel a little bit more included, whether they actually are using something like she, her, or they, them. Being able to really include this additional identifying factor is really, really inclusive that not every sphere is using. So as the next generation, I think that we really want to push for that and make sure that everyone's feeling included, no matter what pronouns they use, and being able to actually include them really just invites that conversation. And beyond just pronouns, I think that there's a lot of space for inclusion within the space industry.
Thank you, Molly. It's a good message, and I'm going to change my Twitter bio to include she, her. Good lesson. Another question that got a lot of upgraded votes is from Anna Volker, and it is, if you could convince every space company and agency to take one action to make space more sustainable, what would that action be? I'm going to ask who would like to take it. Andrew.
So, I'll take this one, at least to start, because my answer is quite short. From the engineering perspective, right, I focus a lot on orbital debris, as I mentioned earlier. And so a lot of I'm sort of going to cheat and use two answers. But what it really boils down to is if you're an operator in space, you control or own a satellite, it really boils down to two things. Don't crash your satellite, and don't blow up your satellite. And that's pretty much it, right? Like if that was followed religiously by every single operator, then our orbital debris problem would be on a track that is much better than the track we're currently on. Sort of zooming out from that, right? It's a bit unrealistic to just immediately expect that. One thing that I think would be incredibly valuable and something that I severely underrated when I was first learning about this topic was the value of open and honest communication among operators. Space, as we see just from the diversity of voices that we have on this panel and from this conference as a whole, but space is truly a global space, and there are so many different voices out there that it's easy to get lost in that din of voices and to not communicate effectively and openly. One of the best ways that we can ensure sustainability going forward is being open with one another and being open to sharing data and to sharing perspectives on things like capacity building and working together to ensure that we are all on the same page going forward. I think what Juliana mentioned a little earlier.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else would like to add something, or we'll move to the next question? Ruvimbo?
Certainly. I think in one word, access would be important. And in a few more words, I would say that much of what we do in the space industry is hinged on the political will. And to that end, we've heard so much from governments, we've heard from the private industry, but how much have we heard from the polity itself, the communities? So the role of civil society actors is going to come in handy as well, because we all bring different social, cultural, anthropological aspirations to outer space. And thus, getting that different perspective, I think, will really help us shape how humanity wants to explore, and will help us, I think, better manage the different multi-stakeholder interests, not only from the governmental, the international, and the commercial, but also from the social, and perhaps even the environmental, as Molly has mentioned very importantly.
Yes, very true, thank you. And it actually ties into another question that I'm going to ask to Juliana, because that specifically deals with the Moon and Mars and other planets. And you know, you mentioned, Ruvimbo, the political will of states, which is so important that we actually make things happen. And this question reads, how can we ensure sustainability gets more than lip service as we begin working and living on other moons, on the Moon and other planets? So specifically on that aspect, Juliana, since you are quite involved with the GAXLA and so on, you want to share your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think that to make really all these new efforts for space exploration, for satellite constellations, for moon exploration, for Mars exploration, we really need to make sure that all of these efforts are coordinated efforts to make sure that they are sustainable. So we need to bring together government representatives, satellite operators or lunar operators, academia, civil society, because space has changed. It's not anymore governed by just a handful of states. We have more states included in the space exploration, and we have more actors. So we need to recognize who are all the stakeholders now involved in space exploration, and involve all of them in the creation of future guidelines that will guide our sustainable use of the moon and in the future of Mars and our orbits. So we need to be inclusive at the personal level, so making sure that all the different identities at the really people level are included, so without regards to gender, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, but also we need to be inclusive at the stakeholder level, so at the higher level, making sure that we have governmental agencies, operators, academia, civil society. So it's really a process of inclusion, as Molly was saying, of collaboration, as also Andrew was saying. So it's a process of bringing together different perspectives, different interests, and being able to find a balance of these interests for a more sustainable future.
Yeah, very true, but it will also be a challenge to bring all those voices to the table, because of course the fora that we have had until now have been very state-centered, and so we need to find a way to either have states represent those other voices, or to convince those fora to include those other stakeholders around the table. That might be a challenge, no? Or do you see that we could reach that?
I think that we are going in the good direction, because I've seen it for the Dark and Quiet Skies initiative. It was an initiative started by UNOSA that brought together satellite operators, academia, governmental representatives, and the same for the Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activities. It is very long name. we are really bringing together all these different perspectives. So even if at COPUS, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, we still have only a representation of states, there are initiatives that are working in parallel to make sure that these processes are happening. So I think we are going in the good direction at least.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go to a question for Molly, and that says, can privatized space activities be equitable when the corporations at the forefront are almost universally criticized for working conditions and pollution? That's a tricky subject, of course. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I would say, could we get it back up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I think that there is definitely the perspective from companies that it's all about money, and we don't need to be taking care of our own our environment and really staying accountable. But I think that it's really key for companies to be working together for that more equitable and inclusive environment to be working in. Personally, I don't have a clear answer of how they can be doing this, but I think that just to piggyback on what Andrew was saying earlier, it's all about communication and that open communication. So really keeping the conversation open and being able to continue to talk about these pressing issues, I think that will at least start guiding us towards the right direction.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Molly. Ruvimbo, this one is for you. To what degree do the panelists believe that access to space should be guaranteed to every nation? What is your thought on that?
To what extent? I think the fullest extent. I think we all agree that all nations should have the chance to contribute to space development. And perhaps going deeper into what space development means, I like to segment it into 3 different nodes, which is research, technology, and innovation, in that order. And of course, Africa is not in prime position quite yet to contribute to technology and innovation, but we can't understate how important the research and development phase is to all space programs. And I'd like to think that we have a wealth of culture and knowledge to contribute in that aspect. But access really is promoting, I suppose, the opportunity to contribute to research, technology, and innovation. And to do that requires, first of all, the education and capacity building so that we are equipped to do so, but also requires a fair amount of development finance as well. We know that space is very lucrative, but it's also a capital-intensive industry. And to that end, we really need a more conglomerated effort to bring about administration which fosters access to these resources, but also fosters harmony. And I think that when we're all coordinated on one initiative, it will make it much more streamlined and advantageous for us to move forward. So to that end, I think that we all agree that access is very important. But if we can look forward to promoting actual practical mechanisms to promote that access, will be much more advantageous.
Okay, so clear answer. Maybe a follow-up question that I see here also, and I will put it up, is as you're representing Africa and really all the developing world, how can we in the developed world bring you to the table, especially for Ubuntu that you mentioned in your talk?
I mean, look around the room. How many other Africans are here today? Very few. These conferences are very expensive. These conferences are also very exclusive. I think that how we can promote more access is to bring more underserved communities to the table. I think it's all fair and fine to say that outer space is the province of all humankind, but we neglect the communities that don't have a voice, that don't have an opportunity to say what they need or to say what outer space means for them. How we can promote more access is to give more voice to the voiceless. I'm very appreciative of the work of policy think tanks like the Open Lunar Foundation, Moon Village Association, and even the Space Generation Advisory Council, because it reaches into the communities. We're a very small community. There are about 3,000 people here, but think of the billions of other people before us and coming forward who will have something to say about space, but don't have the access to do so. So again, capital-intensive industry requires a lot of capital investment, and I think Africa and underserved communities, the global developing world, is worth that investment as well.
Excellent, thank you so much. Here's one for you, Juliana. How can companies, because you've been working on this topic of constellations, astronomy and so on, so hope you agree to take that one. How can companies that operate large How can companies that operate large satellite constellations be held accountable for not maintaining sustainable standards?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to what we were saying before, right? We need to act at the industry level, but also at the national level, at the legal level. So at the national level, we can promote in national legislations licensing requirements, for example, to make sure that before getting an authorization, the satellite operators is, for example, conducting an environmental impact assessment study. So we have the instruments at the legal level to make sure that we can prevent some of the impacts that satellite constellations can have on the environment and on society. At the same time, we also must recognize that being a good actor is also a market value. So it's in the interest of satellite operators to act sustainably. I've seen it with the Dark Skies initiative. We had Amazon Cooper, OneWeb, Starlink, and they all were collaborating with us, collaborating with astronomers to understand what were the balance between the different interests and in which way they could act more sustainably. And not only because of the willingness to do it, but also because it's a market value. It's important for satellite operators to act in a way that is recognized as sustainable. And I think we have seen the initiative of the World Economic Forum, the sustainability rating, that is giving like points. The more sustainable you are, the more points you get. And so it's an effort both in the industry level for being a good actor in the market, but also at the national level and the international level to provide those requirements, those legal requirements that can limit and reduce before the start of these satellite constellations operations.
Absolutely, I agree in that, of course, that kind of actions gives these actors legitimacy and that improves their image, and that is certainly something that we discussed earlier about the incentives, what Molly talked about earlier. So these are all things that can be done, but also we do see indeed the industry taking an interest in that as well. I see the time is going quite quickly. I'm going to take one that perhaps one of the guys from Boulder in the Space Sustainability Initiative would take. What does the timeline of sustainable space future look like? Andrew.
Yeah. So I can hop back in there real quick. I think what Ruvimbo talked about in terms of access to space is really important. I'll just add on that it's not one-time access, right? It's continued access, and that feeds into this idea of we need to ensure that our orbital environments are being cleaned up and kept clean from a buildup of space junk. Because it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, you do have access to space, and while you're up there, your assets are continually under threat from disappearing or breaking due to impacts with a lot of the junk that previous actors have left there. So in terms of this question, right, what does the timeline of a sustainable space future look like? It's interesting. You'll see a lot of projections from various space agencies and actors that demonstrate, right, from my perspective, this gradual increase of orbital debris, often occurring over a period of about 200 years, is kind of a common key baseline for looking at projections of what space looks like in the future. The issue is that, we can't start worrying about this problem 10, 15, 20 years down the line because it involves the exponential growth of a lot of this debris, right? The problem, a lot of the solutions have to come within, a certain number of years, 5, 10 years. And so it's important that we work on these topics now and that we take action now, whether that be mitigating, working on enforcing compliance with existing guidelines and mitigation standard practices, as well as going up and actually removing these large pieces of junk that can contribute to the orbital environment. I think a really poignant example of this is back in 2009. There was a collision between two debris objects, and I believe it was an inactive satellite and another object, and that collision resulted in nearly a third of the current tracked debris that's currently there on orbit. This collision was a tiny, tiny example of the potential collisions that could occur on orbit. There are much larger objects out there with the potential for much greater ramifications for the space environment. And so I think in terms of the timeline, we need to be acting now and taking firm steps in order to ensure that we're moving towards a more sustainable and safe future.
Yeah, so there's some urgency there, for sure. Maybe one last one, because it's now 25. And I see actually two questions dealing with comparing the environment of space and the environment of Earth. And I will put this one up, but they're actually related. Is there a good compromise between sustainability on Earth and in space and the utilization of space resources, which is of course also an important topic in terms of business exploration benefits and balancing the benefits and the challenges. Molly, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I know that we talk a lot about the orbital debris problem and the actual sustainability of space, but something that is often overlooked is the idea of how space can help sustainability here on Earth. Something that actually has come even more to the front of my mind this week through all these amazing sessions that we've been attending. There's a variety of different ways we can approach this, but for example, Earth observation can help us look at the production of food and be able to really create better practices for farming and agriculture. So there's definitely two sides of the coin here, whether it's the sustainability of the space environment itself or here on Earth, and they definitely both need equal weight in considering how sustainability plays into the space industry.
Thank you. And Ruvimbo, would you like to give your perspective also? And the question also specifically talks about marginalized and poorer communities. Will pollution also have a similar disproportionate effect as we have been spoiling things on Earth? Can we avoid doing that in space? Is there still hope?
I think there is definitely still hope. I think when we look at matters of again, it hinders that access to free and fair use and exploration of outer space. And we have to consider that the developing world is not in the position to fully utilize space at the moment. So we have to consider how much space are we leaving for that free and fair use. And I like to be a proponent of what I call the parking system. It could be planetary parks, it could be orbital parks, but what we're really prioritizing, or should be prioritizing at the moment, is relegating access to the communities that don't have the opportunity to fully utilize these spaces as of yet. So to that end, I think that the industry as we know it is an a priori industry, first come, first serve, but that needs to change. It should be more relegated, I suppose, to who has the ability to utilize this to the most sustainable benefits. And of course that would be indigenous communities. We know that much of the spaces that we have left in the world are under the helm of communities that have understood that nature is, I suppose, needs to be protected, needs to be held in the hands of those who, I suppose, understand, I think, to the best priorities how to utilize those resources.
Yeah, so it all comes down to not only looking at, for instance, in the space sustainability rating, not only look at technical, economic impacts, but really also including that social impact in that kind of rating. And I hope we can somehow go there. I think the time is going really fast. It's a fascinating discussion, but I would like to end this by going in reverse order of your pitches and asking you to give a short recap of your conclusion on what is social responsibility for space for you. Molly, would you like to start?
Yeah, so social responsibility in space personally really revolves around inclusion, as well as the open communication between actors, and even in relation to the timeline, we can create a responsible and sustainable future of space right now. We could do it in 10, 20 years, or we could never do it. Ultimately, I think it's up to all of you in the audience, all of us, and the next generation.
True. Wimbo.
As a lawyer, I'm tempted to call on the Outer Space Treaty and just say that it's important to remember that Article 1 of the treaty says that outer space is free for fair use and exploration by all states, regardless of technological development, and should be done so on the basis of international law, of non-discrimination, and of equality as well. So let us do consider those that do not have, I suppose, the means to explore yet, but have all intention to benefit from outer space.
Thank you so much. And yes, space law is part and parcel of anything in space and also of this Congress. Thanks. Juliana.
So I guess today we have seen different definitions of what sustainability is, and it's not just related, as we've seen, to environmental considerations. Sustainability means really creating a space that is inclusive and is equitable, and it must start also at this level of this kind of conference, for example. How many panels until today have you seen with 4 women on stage, or with gender identity considerations, with black women, how many with disabled people? So I think it's really something that we need to start at our level with these space conferences, and to bring more people on board, to bring more communities on board, and make sure that for the future we are able to guarantee an equity for all the generations to come, and all the people that want to be involved in this sector.
Wonderful, thank you. And Andrew, last word to you.
Yeah, to me, social responsibility at its core means taking responsibility for your actions. We've seen over the past, I don't know how many decades, 4 or 5 decades, where a lack of social responsibility has gotten us. A lot of the traditional space actors have been the biggest contributors to the degradation of our orbital environment. And if we want to ensure that space remains and continues to be the province of all humankind, we need actors that have contributed to this debris to stand up and say, you know what, okay, I'm taking responsibility for that. I'm going to work with the international community in order to mitigate the impact has on new actors as well as existing actors. We can't have sort of like a two-tiered system where the traditional space actors continue to pollute without regard for new and emerging space actors. So it really comes down to owning the responsibility of polluting the environment and working to ensure that that does not continue into the future.
Let that voice be heard. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I, for one, have learned a lot from your calls for social responsibility, and I hope that it's the same for those in the room. We have lessons to learn from each other, and I think that this kind of event where we put the next generation at the table and try to listen to their voices is essential. And so thank you so much for contributing to this, and thank you again to the initiative of the Next Generation Plenary. Also, again, one shout out to Carol and Scott for having prepared these young persons so well to let them speak, and Mariam and Matteo to have all the arrangements in place. And I wish you all, with these fellow panelists, a wonderful day at the IAC here in Dubai. Thank you so much.